Welcome to Better Sex, where you get the information and inspiration to create and enjoy your best possible sex life. Join your host, sex therapist Jessa Zimmerman, as she brings you expert guests, helpful tips, knowledge, and strategies to improve your intimate relationships. And now, your host, Jessa Zimmerman.
Hey everybody, it's Jessa back for another episode of the Better Sex Podcast. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with me today and listening. I so appreciate your support and your interest in the show. I would love to hear if you have ideas about what you would like me to cover in the show. As you may have noticed, I cover a huge variety of topics, and there are more and more coming. And I'd love to know what you're interested in. I am totally open for feedback, so you can email me through the bettersexpodcast.com website. Not a problem to do that. I'd love to hear from you. And if you want to be on the show, I'm open to that too. If you have a specialty that's appropriate, or if you want to be part of the personal stories that I share. I do those interviews anonymously, but I love to talk to people that have been through some sort of journey around their sexuality, overcome some obstacles or dealt with something and transformed their sex life. I think that's very helpful and inspirational, really, for other listeners. So if you're one of those people, you've had some sort of sexual journey or transformation, and you are interested in being on the podcast, I'd love to hear from you. So again, you can email me through the website, bettersexpodcast.com. So today, the topic is a new one for me. We're going to talk about sexological bodywork, a little bit of a tongue twister. And the reason we're going to talk about it is because it could be incredibly useful and transformative for people. It can be a great complement to therapy, or it could be a great standalone. But there's something about experiential bodywork that is so profound for change. So when I work with clients in my therapy office, of course, all we're doing is talking. Now, the couples are having experiences at home, and we're certainly talking about what happens with those. We're trying to leverage those. We're trying to learn from them. We're trying to use them to make changes. And often we're very successful. And it could be useful to work with a professional who is trained and safe and ethically bound to help you make some of those discoveries and learnings and changes in an office setting. So my guest today is Charlie Glickman, who is a sexological bodyworker in Seattle. And he's here to talk about the profession, what it's about, what is it? How does it kind of go? What might you expect? Certainly what you should look for if you're going to consider doing this kind of work. How do you find a practitioner that you can trust and really make sure you're in a good situation? But it could be, a real profound change. So hopefully you're going to enjoy the conversation, and who knows, maybe you'll be intrigued. Charlie, thank you so much for being with me today.
It's such a pleasure to be here. Thanks.
This is going to be a fascinating conversation. I can tell.
I hope so.
Could we start with just a definition of sexological bodywork? What is this thing?
Yeah, it's a great question. And you'll get different answers depending on who you ask. So here's the one that I like to give.
Okay.
Sexological bodywork is somatic education in erotic embodiment. So let me break those down.
Yeah. It's almost like every word needs a, yeah.
Yeah. So somatic means that it is body-based. It's experiential. There is room to talk about your experience or to share feelings that are coming up, but the focus is really on the body in the present moment. So that's the somatic piece.
Okay.
The second piece is education. So the intention of each session is for my client to walk out the door with experience or information that they didn't have coming in.
Okay.
So that's the somatic education piece.
Mm-hmm.
Erotic, because we are talking about sexuality. That doesn't necessarily mean genital, although it can, but it's about your relationship to your erotic self. And embodiment is the focus again on what's happening in your body. And can you stay present in the moment in your body, or do you check out, tune out, get distracted? What's the situation there? So you put it all together, and it's body-based experiential work in how to stay present in your body during arousal and erotic experiences. That's a much longer explanation.
Yeah, no, it's good. I mean, because it's somewhat complex, it seems to me, So how does your definition differ from some of the other maybe predominant views? Is there anything significant about how you define it that's different than some other people might hear or learn about?
I think that people who are trained as sexological body workers have individual ways of describing what we do. When I went through the training, several times throughout each training day, one of the teachers would ring a bell, and we were supposed to turn to the person next to us, whoever it was, and ask them, hey, how do you define sexological bodywork? Because we needed to figure out our language.
Okay, right. How are you going to talk about this thing?
Yeah. I'm confident that my definition would be very much in alignment with anybody else's. It's just that different people have different ways of talking about it. I tend to boil things down to sound bites. So 4 words, that's great.
Yeah, it is. So can you tell us a little bit about your journey into this work? What was the path and the interest that has driven you to take this on?
Well, I've been a sex educator for almost 30 years now. Most of that time was focused on either writing or teaching workshops or one-on-one educational interaction. So mostly focused on transmission of information. And about 15 years ago, I went back and got my PhD in adult sex education. And my focus was on sex and shame. And my intention at the time was to write a book on sexual shame. And I tried several times over the years, and it never really got anywhere. And I was asking myself, what's going on here? And I realized that I could talk about how shame works sort of on a neurological level, what happens in the body, how the emotions work, how to talk about it interpersonally and socioculturally. But the piece that I was really missing is the somatic healing that shame needs. And so I thought to myself, oh, I'll take this training and then I'll write this book. What I didn't know at the time, I did know when I signed up for the training that the program requires a certain number of hands-on practice sessions, giving and receiving.
Right.
And in my second session, I had this sort of moment of clarity where I realized, oh, I can't take training. I actually have to develop my own practice to then be able to continue writing and teaching on this topic. And I discovered over the course of the training how powerful the hands-on work can be in a way that talking doesn't do. Talking has other advantages.
Yeah.
But as an example, there's a boundary exercise that I do where I ask my client, I explain what we're going to do first, and then I take one of their hands in my hands, and then I tell them, when you're ready, using whatever language feels natural to you, tell me to take my hands away. And people say it in a lot of different ways and lots of different experiences. But I had a client who once burst into tears when I took my hands away because I was literally the first man in her life who had stopped touching her when she set the boundary,
Wow.
without arguing, without requiring explanations. We could have talked about this round and around and around for hours. But having the experience gave us really valuable information that we wouldn't have had otherwise.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it makes me think of when I work with couples in my practice, we talk, of course, a lot. And that's all we do in my office.
Yeah.
But it has to be experienced. This change doesn't happen because we think about it or talk about it. Like we have to find a way to have different experiences than we've had.
Exactly. One of the challenges that therapists face is that you're relying on your clients to accurately report what happened.
Yeah.
And sometimes you don't get the full story because people are fudging the truth a little bit, or they didn't notice something, or they have embarrassment about the situation, or maybe it just is so familiar to them that they don't even notice it.
Yeah.
And so when I'm doing a session with a client, for example, that same boundary exercise I just described, I was doing this with somebody else. And when I told him, okay, tell me to take my hands away, I could see on his face, he did that nervous smile that people do when they're afraid they're going to be blamed or attacked or,
right.
shamed, whatever it was. And I was able to say, hey, wait a minute, what was that?
Yeah.
And he didn't even know that was there. Now, granted, in a therapy session, you often pick up on those things as well.
Right. But not in those intimate moments. Right.
Exactly.
Yeah. So we might get it live in the session about something going on, but we're not being able to get that out of their physical interactions or intimate time. Yeah.
Yeah. Those micro expressions are so fast and we don't even realize we're doing them. So,
right.
So the somatic and hands-on work really gives me access to a different kind of information. And ideally for me, as a practitioner, I love when my clients are also working with therapists, because then they can take our experience together into their therapy session, talk about it in more depth, and then come back to me ready for the next piece of the puzzle.
Right. It sounds like a good, collaborative partnership, like, complementary. That's the word I want,
Yeah, it's a great combination.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm struck by the simplicity in some ways of that exercise, the boundary exercise. This is like dressed and,
Yeah.
It seems like the work you do must go from, not sexual at all to sexual, and how powerful that can be, even it's, sort of an air quotes here, entry level.
Yeah.
Exercise.
Well, and there's a wide range. You're absolutely right. And when we're talking about sexual interactions, I also work with people around things like flirting.
Mm.
I was working with a woman once who never understood why her husband didn't pick up on her sexual signals. And she thought that he was rejecting her and not interested in her. And so we sat down one day and I said, all right, we're going to practice flirting today. And once we got into it, I was able to give her the feedback of, yeah, you tell me that you're sending all of this sexual energy at me, but I'm not seeing a thing.
Wow.
I would have no idea. So let's practice some body language stuff. Let's practice, the looking down and looking back at me. Let's practice turning towards me or putting your hand on my arm. And let's, do this as if you were engaging with your husband, and let's figure out what feels good for you.
Mm-hmm.
And in the months since we did that session, I've seen her just open up so much, and her husband is so responsive. It turned out this whole time he was holding back because he didn't think she was interested.
Right. Interesting. And again, this, you're describing a couple that I would see in my sex therapy practice, and it would be difficult to uncover that, without that sort of felt experience or that in the room kind of process. Yeah.
Yeah. The practicing flirting, that actually comes from a different modality called somatica, which was developed by two women, Celeste and Danielle, who had been sexological bodywork trainers, and then they developed this other program to complement it. And so I really do work with folks, everything from the how do I express interest and desire? How do I name my boundaries? How do I ask for what I want? All the way up to what kinds of physical sensations feel good to you in your body.
Mm-hmm.
You can't ask for what you want if you don't have the words.
Right. Or if you don't know what you want.
Yeah.
So that leads into, and I think this is kind of broad, but like what, what kinds of concerns do you work with? You're already starting to talk a little bit about it, but can you give us a sense really of the breadth of kinds of concerns that people can, they can benefit from this work?
Yeah. Well, I want to just say one thing first, which is
Yeah.
to name the ethical container that Sexological Bodywork and somatic sex education, which is another name for the same thing, fits within.
Okay.
So first is in these sessions, all touch is one way. So it's from me to my client, whether it's on their arm or their back or wherever it may be.
And this is across the industry. I mean, this is...
Yeah. So if you're not using that container, it's not sexological bodywork. It might still be powerful healing work like sacred intimacy, but it's a different modality. And so there's three elements to it. One is that I'm staying fully clothed, as I mentioned.
Okay.
I'm usually wearing, a t-shirt and yoga pants, right? Not sexy unless Lululemon is your kink. The second thing is all touch is one way from me to the client. So the focus is on them. It's not about my desires.
Right.
And for any genital touch, I'm wearing gloves. So it maintains a hygiene barrier.
Right.
And those three things go a long way towards maintaining a practitioner-client relationship, which is crucial for this work, given the kind of topics and experiences that different people do.
Yes. Yes.
So for example, some of the areas of focus that I see a lot of people for: identifying and naming boundaries, asking for what you want, navigating consent and shame, rejection, triggers that come up if your partner says no, figuring out somebody's particular erotic arousal patterns. And so what I mean by that is some people need to be touched in very specific ways, and other people maybe need to have a certain emotional container or framework before they feel safe and comfortable. So figuring out what those elements are that works for this person. I do a lot of work around helping people come back into balance after experiences with trauma, whether it is a current situation or something in the past. Pleasure mapping. Pleasure mapping is a kind of session where it's basically a buffet. We try lots of different kinds of touch, and my client tells me, hey, this feels good, this one not so much. And then I can tell them what they enjoy so that they can tell their partners.
Right.
There are also sexological body workers who do things like working around premature ejaculation, erection difficulties, multiple orgasm. That's less of my focus, but there are other folks who do those kinds of things.
Okay. So are there other are there themes to the precipitating events that bring people into your practice? Like you already mentioned trauma, but what else maybe gets people in your door?
Ooh, that's a really good question. Let me think about that.
Yeah, you can. Yeah.
I think the big thing with it is people feeling like there's something missing from their sex lives, and they need some guidance to figure out what that looks like. So that's a big one. Another one is people who realize that during sexual experiences that they check out for some reason, or that they want to learn how to relax and receive pleasure rather than a more performance-oriented approach. Those are probably the biggest ones for this, for the sexological body work that I do.
Right.
And then there are people who come to me thinking that that's what they need, and then we sit down and we talk about it, or when I do the initial video call with them, and then it turns out that they don't need the hands-on work, or maybe they don't need it yet. What they need is shame resilience, or support in naming their boundaries with a partner, or they need to unpack some of their emotional patterns. Why is it every time my partner says this to me, I get triggered? Let's figure that out. I think that's especially true for men because for a lot of guys, anxiety, guilt, and shame cause erection difficulties.
Right.
And they think that they're having sexual problems, but it's really something different. Or couples who think that they're having sexual difficulties, but it's actually that they're fighting over money or how to discipline their children, or, I'm tired of your mom living in our upstairs guest bedroom, whatever it is. There's a deeper
I'm always telling couples, you can't take sex out of the context of the rest of your relationship. Like sometimes people will come to me and they're saying like, a marriage therapist, and then they come into me for the sex part. And it's like, well, we can't extricate those things,
Yeah. In the same way that sex therapists, much of what you do is not directly about sex. It's the context or the relationship or whatever's there. A lot of what I do is similar. And then I also add this piece on.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Do you work a lot with people that have had some sort of change in their sexual functioning? I'm thinking about people that have gone through, gender transition or surgery, or even just menopause or aging. Suddenly their body's different. And they may have, maybe now they need pleasure mapping, or now they need, a whole new exploration.
Yeah, I've worked with lots of different people. That everything from, my vagina is responding differently ever since I had kids, or I got on birth control, I got off birth control, I had a hysterectomy, I've gone through menopause, gender transition. You're right, that's a big one.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes with folks who have had children, that there might be scar tissue from that experience, and so they need some scar tissue work to help the scar soften and relax. And that's especially true if there's been an episiotomy or if there's been that kind of thing. But I also end up working with quite a few folks who are going through some sort of change or transformation in their sex lives for personal reasons. Like I once worked with a woman who divorced her emotionally abusive, now ex-husband, and she was getting back into dating, and she didn't know how to tell someone what she wanted because for a number of years she hadn't had a partner who cared to be direct about it. And so, in the same way that menopause or gender confirmation surgery or anything else might be a piece of it, sometimes it's something as common as divorce, and I don't know what I like anymore.
Right. Hey, this is Jess. I'm just taking a quick break, and I want to make sure you know about the guide I wrote about how to talk to your partner about sexual concerns. This comes up a lot in my practice. People have struggles, and it takes them so long to bring it up with their partner. They're afraid that conversation is going to go badly. Their partner's going to be upset. The partner's going to be defensive, or they just don't know how to talk about sex and sexual problems. Common problem. So I wrote this guide that really helps you address this. It helps you prepare for the conversation, how to introduce the conversation, and then tips about how to actually get through the conversation so that you can change things with your partner as a team. If you are interested in this guide, you can find it at bettersexpodcast.com/guide. Again, bettersexpodcast.com/guide. Happy to send it to you. So what's the basic, I guess I want to say protocol? Do you have a sort of system that people go through when they start to work with you?
I wish I did. It would make my work much easier.
Well, I mean, at least, what's a first step, and then expectations a little bit about what happens.
Yeah. So the first session or two tend to be pretty consistent. And then after that, not so much.
Okay.
First sessions are almost always fully clothed. We're not doing any of the work specifically focused on somebody's sexuality. Usually, I like to make the first session or two about building the relationship. So we'll do boundary exercises. We'll do some exercises in giving and receiving feedback based on Betty Martin's Wheel of Consent stuff.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, if folks out there listening are not familiar with Betty, if you go to bettymartin.org/videos, she has some amazing videos for free on her website. I thought I understood consent, and then I took her workshop.
Wow.
She's amazing.
Okay. We'll put that link in the show notes so people can get it easily. Yeah.
She's fabulous. For me, I won't do any hands-on work if somebody is not capable of saying, this is exactly what I want you to do today.
Yeah.
So, for example, if I have a client who wants to, let me think of an example here. Well, all right. So this woman who I was talking about who had gotten divorced, we did some pleasure mapping sessions, which was basically erotic massage. For each different technique that I tried, she could rate on a scale of 1 to 10 how good it feels.
Mm-hmm.
And then for the things that scored 7 or higher, I then described what it was I was doing. Now, what makes this experience different from an actual erotic massage session with a sex worker, for example, is that the goal was not to have an orgasm. The goal was to learn something new about your body. And so if somebody walks out the door learning like, hey, these are 5 things I can tell my lover I like, it doesn't matter if there's an orgasm or not.
Right.
And then the second difference is that once we discover those things, we don't repeat that session because there's nothing new to learn there.
Right. I am struck, though. It's something I talk to clients about in terms of consent, that the ability to say no or to give feedback is so fundamental to trust. And I can totally imagine how you need to be confident that your clients can do that, because otherwise sessions could end up traumatizing them, or they find themselves again doing something they really don't want to be doing, or.
Yeah. And so that you're right. And there's 2 pieces there. One is, as I said, I won't do anything that somebody can't look me in the eye and tell me this is what I want to explore.
Yeah.
But also one of the other things that we practice in the first couple of sessions is, how do you say no to me? So for example, I might, if you were my client, like I was talking about with that first exercise on the hand, maybe I will touch your forearm, and then you get to practice saying, no, stop, let go of me, stop touching me, right? Whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
And you get to find your words. And if it turns out that for you saying no is a triggery word, because it is for a lot of people,
yes,
then we experiment with stop touching me, or let go of me, or I need to take a break.
Yeah. I am imagining people listening to this who, I don't want to quite say they feel triggered, but who could imagine feeling a ton of anxiety learning to do that. This is, it's not easy for so many people.
You're absolutely right. And I think in my experience, the fact that it's not about my emotions, my experience, it's like if you get body work from a massage practitioner, as long as they're doing a good job, you don't really need to care whether they are enjoying themselves, thinking about something else, what's coming up for them. Oh, what do they think of my tattoo? Right. It's really not so relevant. So when we do these exercises, the fact that it's not about me, and that I can give my clients permission to experiment and not be perfect, and I'm not going to get upset about it.
Right. There's no real, there's not all the complicating relationship dynamics that they might be trying to tend to or worry about, damage or hurt or repercussions,
Yeah. And I love when people say no to me.
Yeah.
Because just as you said, it's safer for them when they know they can say no. It's safer for me.
Right.
So the flip side to not doing anything that someone can't specifically ask for is I also won't do anything if I'm not confident that they could tell me to stop if they need to.
Right. that makes sense. I can see why you start with the boundary stuff.
Yeah. And that's true for anyone who does this work. It's especially true for men doing this work.
Mm,
Because for valid reasons, the level of fear or anxiety or triggers around it are just that much higher.
yeah. So this is sort of this question's occurring to me in the moment, but how do you protect yourself as a male provider of this service? Like you're working alone in a room with somebody, and how do you safeguard yourself from, I guess I want to say accusations at first, but even it just seems risky to me.
I get that. In some ways it is. I think I think there's a few pieces to that. One is if somebody has a history of triggers and or traumas, we spend a lot of time building safety before any kind of hands-on work happens. It might be more than a dozen sessions, depending on what's going on for someone. There's no rush.
Right.
The more somebody feels like they want to rush into that work, the more important it is not to do it.
Yeah.
I think another piece is that people get triggered by all kinds of stuff. And as you know, right, people get triggered by things that their therapist says to them or what have you.
Right.
And so we spend quite a bit of time talking about, what are your patterns when you go into triggers? What can I do to support you through that? How do we navigate our interpersonal relationship if a trigger comes up? So that's a second piece that I think is really
right
relevant there. And also because I'm not a therapist, right? If somebody is actively in their trauma, I won't do hands-on work with them. I might do other coaching work, or I will more likely refer them to a trauma-oriented therapist.
Right.
Because that's not safe for anybody.
Yeah. Yeah. So how does somebody, like listening to the podcast, how do people know that they're ready for this, that this would be potentially a good fit for them? And then how do they find somebody? What do they look for? What are the questions they should ask?
Oh, you're asking such great questions for this. So I think, as far as deciding if this is the right work for you, if the description of it sounds like it would be relevant, if it feels like it's a little scary, but you also keep finding yourself drawn to it, there's something there. It might not be this work exactly. Maybe it's working with a sex therapist or whatever else. But if you feel like your sexual experiences are confusing, like you just don't even know how to describe what you're looking for, or you're getting stuck in repeat patterns of whether it's with a consistent partner or with different partners, that's probably a time to get some outside perspective.
Right.
Some things that I would highly recommend asking a practitioner, reading through their website or talking to them about. One is, where did you get your training and when? And what you're really looking for there is folks who went through one of the actual sexological bodywork trainings or somatic sex education trainings. Again, same thing, different names.
Right.
There are some people out there who use those terms without having gone through the training. And the Sexological Bodywork organization tries to shut those down as often as they can, but it's the internet.
All right. So somebody should look for some sort of organization and the person saying, hey, I went through their program.
Yeah, this is where I did it.
Okay.
This is, right. Who did they take the training with? Even if you don't know who that person is, right? Are they showing a paper trail, for lack of a better word?
Okay.
I think it's also worth looking to see if their area of expertise aligns with what you're looking for. So for example, there are folks who specialize in helping men overcome erection difficulties.
Right.
I have a colleague here in Seattle. One of his areas of focus is helping gay men who grew up in conservative religious backgrounds figure out how to navigate their sexuality and their spirituality. I also know a guy in San Francisco, I don't know if he's still doing it, but one of his specialties was helping gay men who were getting clean and sober figure out how to have sex without drugs.
Wow. Okay. So there's a lot,
right?
Even within this field, there's a lot of diversity in terms of specialty and.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
So look for something that feels like it's lined up with what you are looking for. I think it's also important to find out what training somebody has had around trauma. The somatic sex educator trainings these days all integrate trauma into the curriculum. Unfortunately, when I took the training back in 2014, they hadn't yet done that.
Oh, wow.
So I took a separate training in trauma.
Okay. Yeah. Is there a central list from any of these organizations that people go to? Or are you just talking about Googling sexological bodywork and, seeing what's up?
The answer is a little bit of both.
Okay.
The Association of Certified Sexological Bodyworkers, their website is sexologicalbodyworkers.org. And they have a directory on their website, but it is a little bit out of date. And so there are newer people who aren't listed there.
Okay.
As far as I know, there isn't like a central repository.
Okay.
But if you Google sexological bodywork and your city, that should probably turn up. There's a lot of people on the West Coast in the US, some people scattered elsewhere, and then quite a few practitioners in Canada, all across Europe, Australia, because those are places where there's a training program. So there's a lot of people in those places.
Okay. It is good to hear you point out, though, that it's not necessarily that people should feel totally comfortable with this before they would call you up. Like, it's okay to feel a little afraid of this, right?
Oh,
or
yeah.
A little anxious. Yeah.
If somebody shows up on a first session with me and they don't have any anxiety about it, either they don't need what I have to offer, or they're really good at repressing that feeling. In the same way that anybody, your first day with a therapist. I mean, I've worked with therapists as a client. I've worked with therapists off and on for years, and still, whenever I seek out a new practitioner, there's always a little bit of anxiety the first time I walk into the room with them.
Yeah.
So if you don't feel, if there isn't a little bit of worry there, then you're not learning anything.
Right. Anything else I didn't ask you, or points you want to make, or things you want to share about how people find you? I guess those are questions. But
yeah. Well, and I guess one last piece as far as finding a practitioner is, I read years ago, I don't have the research, but I read years ago that as far as therapy goes, what makes therapy successful is not the therapist's particular approach, what school they went to, what sort of, are they doing cognitive behavioral therapy, or are they doing art therapy? What's important is the relationship that you have with them.
Yeah.
And of course, you need to find somebody who's compatible with you. So
right.
I think it's the same thing with this kind of work. And so I would recommend, reading through their website, but also find their social media pages and look through what they post and what they say and what they write. Does this feel like a safe person to you?
Yeah.
Because that's the most important piece.
Right. Good point.
Yeah. Safety.
Yeah.
All about safety.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So how can people find you, learn more about you?
I'm very easy
to mention.
Yeah, I'm very easy to track down. My website is makesexeasy.com. And I offer a free 30-minute get acquainted video call to talk about what's going on for you, see if I feel like the right fit. If I'm not the right fit, I'm happy to suggest some of my colleagues, because, my goal is supporting the profession. If it's not me, then let's find you someone else. And I also do quite a bit of work over video, obviously not the hands-on work, but there's a lot of coaching work that is just fine over video.
Oh, okay. So you're not limited to just the Seattle area. I mean, for the hands-on work, I guess you are, but.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, for the hands-on work I am. But, I used to travel quite a bit teaching workshops and things, and I would try to do sessions while I was on the road. And what I found is that it just doesn't have the strong enough relationship for what I like to do.
Yeah.
But, if somebody out there is looking for a practitioner for hands-on work and you're not in Seattle, shoot me a note anyway. The contact form on my website goes right into my email inbox. I am happy to suggest any of my colleagues who might be a little bit closer.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm happy to do that.
Okay, great. Well,
Yeah,
thank you. I hope the audience has found this intriguing, and that at least a few people are thinking, maybe this is the work I need.
I hope so. It's amazing work. And like I said, it complements therapy so well.
Yeah.
So I'm thrilled to get to have this conversation with you because I like building those bridges between our professions.
Right. Well, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thank you, Jessa.
You've been listening to Better Sex. Please visit our website, bettersexpodcast.com, for show notes and additional episodes.
And that's a wrap for today. I really hope you enjoyed the episode. If you are enjoying the podcast, if some of this material resonates with you and you would like to make a difference and make sure that this keeps coming out in the world once a week, ongoing, there are a couple things you could do to show your appreciation. The first would be to go to iTunes and rate and review the show. That really helps us be found by new listeners when you review the show on iTunes. You can find a link at bettersexpodcast.com/iTunes. The other thing I want to invite you to consider is becoming a Patreon. For a small monthly pledge, you get some benefits. So for $2 a month, you get advance access to every single episode. For $5 a month, you get a chapter of my upcoming new book. And for $10 a month, I host quarterly get-to-know-you and question-and-answer chats over the web, and you get invited to that. I would love to have your membership in that, become part of the Better Sex family. You can find a link at bettersexpodcast.com/Patreon, which is Patreon. Again, thanks for listening. I'm glad you're here. Feel free to comment, ask questions, get in touch. I'd love to hear from listeners. Thanks.